firm and strong and take our keynote address. And we're most honored to have him with us. Brother Comrade Adu Amankwa, immediate past General Secretary of the ITUC Africa, and indeed, and of course, former Secretary General of the great TUC. Please, let's put our hands together for our comrade. Please keep clapping until he gets to the microphone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Na. And good evening, everyone present. Brother Chairman of TUC, Bernard Owusu, Secretary General Joshua Ansan, Honorable Minister of Labour, Dr. Pepo, esteemed members of the General Council of TUC, my fellow veterans and doyens, Secretary General of OATU, Organization of African Trade and Unity, Comrade Adu, our dear guest Professor Ekwia Brichum, dear comrades, invited guests, I'm indeed deeply honored for the invitation to deliver the 80th anniversary lecture of the TUC. First course in the life of any organization is certainly not a mean achievement and deserves to be celebrated. But beyond the celebration of an important milestone such as this, 80 years is also a time for critical reflection. And as a theme for the anniversary proposes, it provides occasion to interrogate the TUC's past in order to assist the organization to chart a way forward. I'm delivering this address under the topic From Gold Coast to Ghana and Beyond. 80 years of solidarity, struggle, and the unfinished business of social justice. Of course, it is under the anniversary theme of 8 decades of mobilizing workers and seeking social justice, a historical interrogation for the future of the TUC and the working class. In many respects, the TUC's journey mirrors the story of the African working class and its organizations. From the early days of workplace organization, that is around the continent, through anti-colonial mobilization, to meeting the challenges of organizational consolidation, again through the challenge of nation building and structural adjustment, to the ongoing struggle against neoliberal globalization and neocolonialism. Reviewing this history also leads us to a reflection of the fortunes of our country and that of other African countries with whom we share a common history and destiny. The continuing relevance of the TUC and the African labor movement will derive from the ability to reinvent ourselves in order to meet the demands of today. Let's take a look at some key phases in the evolution of the TUC. Working conditions under colonial rule have been generally acknowledged to have been largely oppressive, and very early in the days, workers formed groups that enabled them to protest. But the earliest groupings, actually, which were attempts at self-organization, were those of tradespeople, like blacksmiths, goldsmiths, masons, and bricklayers, then carpenters. These were characterized, these early formations of self-help were characterized by the adoption of a set of rules designed to regulate their own work. Because these were really like self-employed people who sought to regulate their own work. But also around that time, there was evidence of early trade union activity. And some of the earliest instances were in 1919, when workers of Public Works Department, PWD, I don't think it exists anymore. Does it still exist? Okay. Public Works Department, PWD workers, protested vehemently against a delay in their salaries, in their wages. Miners also did the same. And then, railway artisans protested for pension rights, while other categories of railway workers demanded uniforms. And then, there is a famous story about a strike by fishermen who used to row people. Ships could not come right to the coast. They had to dock a bit inside. So we needed boats to go and bring people in. And in 1925, there is a report about the visit of the Prince of Wales. And on the day he arrived, the fishermen said they were not going to row the boats until they got a raise in the money that they got for that ferrying of people. So already among the self-employed, organization, the sense of organization had begun to develop. Now, these developments, early developments, were complemented by other occurrences or similar occurrences in other African countries. And here there are reports about colonies, of course, at the time. There are reports about strikes in Kenya in 1921-22, in Uganda in 1929, and then in 1929 again in the Gambia. And then in Nigeria, you have 1921. So by the end of the 30s, the elements of trade union activism, which had begun to grow in the colonies, caught the attention of the colonial authorities, who then decided to develop a policy on trade union growth. And they did that. In doing so, they established first a labor department in 1938 in the Gold Coast to monitor the affairs of labor. Shortly after that, 3 years after that, in 1941, the Gold Coast government passed the Trade Union Ordinance, what came to be known as Cap 91. That new law made trade union activities lawful. In fact, the indications are that the British learned from their own experience in England that when they tried to control and in fact ban the development of unions, they went underground and unionism became very violent. So in order to avoid that, and then also to provide a framework for the development of unions, they passed Cap 91. In order that they could also constrain unions. And here, the new act permitted any five or more workers to form a trade union. It also required the registration of every union, and also allowed union funds only to be used for what they considered to be lawful union activities. Cap 91 and its enactment and the conditions it created boosted the development of unions. And that is how come on the 8th of September, 80 years ago to the date today, the Trade Union Congress of the Gold Coast was inaugurated at the offices of the Railway Workers Union in 2nd D with C.W. Techimenson and Manfred Gazy as the president and secretary, respectively. Once the TUC was formed, it became embroiled in the struggle for independence. And following the 1948 riots, there was an arrest of leaders of the United Gold Coast Convention, the Big Six. And most groups went quiet. The TUC gathered courage to meet in 2nd D and decided to demand of the colonial government the release of those who had been arrested. So they sent a message to the colonial authorities, they started mobilizing their trade councils, and in the process, the TUC leadership was invited to meet with the colonial authorities. Following that meeting, long meeting, following that meeting, the leaders who had been arrested were released, and then also the Watson Commission was set up to investigate the causes of the riots. The Watson Commission and its formation and the recommendations from that led to the formation of the Kuse Committee, which then developed the first roadmap, as it were, for independence before elections were held, in 51 or so. So the TUC had become very political. And then in 1949, we know that the CPP was formed as a breakaway from the United Gold Coast Convention. Now, many trade union leaders were also members of the CPP. And in 1949 again, October, the workers of meteorological services went on strike, which led to a dismissal of a number of them, quite many of them. So the TUC got interested in that matter and pressed for their reinstatement, or in refusal to do that, they threatened to go on strike. And in fact, the historical records say that the TUC leadership at the time were even invited by the Joint Provincial Council of Chiefs, to stop their action, but they didn't listen to them. So on January 7th, 1950, the TUC declared a general strike in support of the meteorological workers. Of course, there was a lot of politics going on then. And in fact, the CPP had already also declared that it was going to declare positive action by January 8th. So TUC general strike started January 7th, and then on January 8th, the CPP declared positive action. So there was a acute coincidence, between the general strike and the positive action. We know that the positive action led to the arrest of Nkrumah and all that. But it is still a fact that that general strike and the declaration of positive action actually fired the independence struggle considerably, gave a major boost to the anti-colonial struggle. But it also created a crisis for the TUC, because out of that strike, many people were dismissed and would not be reinstated. And the crisis it created then was that because the TUC could not get them reinstated immediately, they decided then to form a Ghana Unemployed association. You know. Yeah. Ghana Unemployed Association, which kept on pressing for the reinstatement. It got a few reinstated, so they decided that, if we can do that, then we could also as well become a national center. So, right then, in 1951, they formed a new national center, the Ghana Trade Union Congress. The one which had formed earlier was the Trade Union Congress of the Bopos. And out of the ashes of the Ghana Unemployed Association was formed the Ghana TUC. So that was the crisis that I talk about, that emerged out of that general strike. But fortunately, the people were all keyed up. Both sides were all keyed up to struggle. And the CPP was also very close. So the CPP intervened in that crisis and brokered a merger between the old Unemployed Association, which had become the Ghana TUC, and the original TUC. They were prevailed upon to come together. So the two centers lasted for just about a year. And then within a year, they had come together. But by this time also, unions were growing. Many unions were growing. So TUC leaders began to talk about a new structure, the possibility of a new centralized structure. They sent emissaries to the German Democratic Republic at the time, to the TUC in the UK, and also to Israel to examine the trade union structures that existed there. So from 1953 up to 1957, and at that time the TUC used to have annual conferences. On every occasion, the question of a new structure was on the agenda of the conference. So by the time of independence, it was ripe for them to launch this new structure. At the time of independence, there are reported to have been about 80 unions in the country at the time, which were considered too many. So the TUC, at its 1957 conference, decided on the new structure. And because the TUC had established itself as a reliable ally of the CPP in the anti-colonial struggle, they managed to get legal support to support the new structure. So the new structure, and the legal support came in the form of a new act, Industrial Relations Act of 1958. It was subsequently amended a bit in 59, 1960. But this was a new act which gave legal recognition to the TUC. Originally, it was only the unions which had been registered under CAP 91. When the TUC came together, they didn't have any legal backing as such. But now, the 1958 Act gave them a legal status. And in the law, the TUC was constituted by its 16 national unions. The 16 national unions were created to reflect the different sectors. And all the 80 unions were asked to fit into one union or the other. Apart from these 16 unions, originally it was 24 under the new act, but it got changed to 16. Apart from these 16 unions, nobody could register a new union without the consent of the minister. And then the new act also introduced what has come to be known as a union shop, whereby when you enter a workplace and it's organized, automatically you become a member of the union. So the union shop was also introduced by the 1958 Act. And then the check-off system was also introduced, by which dues would be deducted at source and paid directly to the TUC. Under the same act, compulsory collective bargaining was instituted. Some employers, particularly in the mining industry then, were very difficult about collective bargaining, even where a union had existed and was clearly identifiable. The mining companies didn't want to negotiate. It took the 58 Act to compel them to negotiate with the unions. And then, under the same act, there was compulsory conciliation and arbitration. They were introduced as the means to settle industrial disputes. You could hardly go on strike under that. In addition to that, the CBP in 1960 also passed the Civil Service Interim Regulations Act, which made trade union membership compulsory for all civil servants. What we must remember, though, is that not all the unions were happy with these changes. The more established unions, some sections of the railway, some sections of UAC employees at the time, and even the miners were not very happy. So they kept on protesting and making representations even to the International Labour Organization. So there was some opposition. And in fact, also inside the CPP, it wasn't everybody who agreed, because they thought that the unions had been made too powerful. So there was some resentment. So altogether, opposition to the new Industrial Relations Act, it grew. And by 1965, as a result of pressure from both within and from without, a new Industrial Relations Act, Act 299, was promulgated. And this new Act, Act 299, continued to make the TUC the sole representative of organized labor. But this time, until the unions decided otherwise. If the unions decided that they didn't want the TUC to go, but then, as long as the unions recognized it as such, the TUC was the sole representative. And then, also under Act 299, the union shop was abolished. So some changes were made, but the TUC still continued to derive its legitimacy or legal basis from the law on industrial relations. Then, so this was the TUC as it was developing organizationally. On the socioeconomic front, President Nkrumah had designated what he called the workers' enterprise sector as the fifth sector of the economy. And the CPP government supported the TUC in some economic endeavors. In fact, the records are that one Commonwealth Trust Limited, which was a British company, which was leaving Ghana for good when independence came, government took it over and handed it to the TUC. AG Leventis, some Lebanese, when they were also leaving, government bought it and transferred that to the TUC. So, and within that, they established what was called LACO. LACO was supposed to be the General Cooperative Association of Labour in Ghana. So LACO, together with Leventis, which had been taken over, and the Commonwealth Trust Limited, all together came together to constitute the Ghana National Trading Company, GNTC. I'm sure some of you know it, even though a few people may not know it because it got divested, a few decades ago. So GNTC was born out of that, and it was for the TUC. It was like the TUC's business, major business wing at the time. In addition to that, there was also the Industrial Cooperative Society, Indusco, which was established also in 1959, with a mandate to engage directly in industrial promotion and to support primary industrial cooperatives. So on the one hand, TUC was clear in developing as a workers' organization to undertake collective bargaining and deal with workplace issues. but it also was concerned with the economy. So we can see that by 1960, very early in independence, the Trade Union Congress had more or less established itself as one of the main pillars of the post-colonial state. The relations between the TUC and the government were not all rosy, though. In 1959, just 2 years after independence, at that time, Tetega was the Secretary General. Some people, I don't know the story, some say that some people thought he was becoming too powerful. So Tetega got removed from TUC by Nkrumah to become the head of the Builders Brigade at the time. But that was actually for a very short period, because I think when they realized that the Builders Brigade was a paramilitary kind of organization, and Tetega took his popularity there, so I think they brought him back very quickly, after about 4 months. But it says something about the control that the CPP had managed to secure over the TUC.